Atlantis is usually introduced as if it were a place waiting to be found, a vanished island, a drowned city, a civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, swallowed by the sea in a single terrible day and night. But the oldest surviving Atlantis is not an inscription, it is not a ruin, it is not a sailor's report preserved in a harbor archive. It is a story told inside Plato. That one fact does not make the story unimportant. In some ways, it makes it more interesting. Plato gave later readers something that feels almost historical, a chain of memory, Egyptian priests, Solon, ancient Athens, named kings, measurements, rings of land and water, a war, a catastrophe, and a date pushed far into deep time. Yet he placed all of it inside a philosophical conversation about cities, virtue, memory, and decline. So in this episode, we are not going to ask whether Atlantis has finally been solved. That question has been asked so many times that it can drown out the older and stranger question. What did Plato's Atlantis mean before it became a global mystery? The story begins not with the island, but with a conversation. In the Timaeus, Socrates has been speaking about an ideal city. He wants to see that city not only described in theory, but imagined in motion. How would such a society act under pressure in war and in history? Critias then offers an old tale. He says it came through his family from Solon, the famous Athenian lawgiver. Solon, in turn, is said to have heard it from Egyptian priests. The priests tell him that the Greeks are like children because they remember only recent disasters, while Egypt preserves far older records. This is the first reason Atlantis has felt so powerful to later readers. Plato does not simply say, once upon a time. He gives the story an archive. He gives it a route of transmission. Egypt to Solon, Solon to the family of Critias, Critias to the conversation we are hearing. Inside that frame, the priests describe an ancient Athens, older and nobler than the Athens of Plato's own day. This early Athens is brave, disciplined, and ordered. It faces a vast power from beyond the known Mediterranean world, the empire of Atlantis. If we stay inside Plato's account, Atlantis is not just a beautiful lost place, it is an imperial power. It rules islands and parts of the mainland. It presses inward, it becomes a test for Athens. That detail matters because it changes the mood of the legend. The Atlantis of modern imagination is often a victim, a glittering civilization destroyed by disaster. Plato's Atlantis is also a warning. It is magnificent, wealthy, organized, and ambitious. Its fall belongs to a moral story as much as to a geological one. In the Critias, Plato gives more detail. Atlantis is associated with Poseidon. Its royal house descends from the god and a mortal woman named Cleito. The island is described through rings of land and water, a central sacred space, bridges, canals, walls, docks, temples, metals, laws, and assemblies of kings. The description is rich enough that later readers could visualize it almost like a plan, and that is the second reason the story would not die. It has the texture of evidence, even when it is still literature. Names, distances, inherited memory, measurements, and catastrophe all invite the mind to treat the passage like a puzzle. But details in a story are not the same thing as archaeological evidence. That distinction is the center of Atlantis. The story sits exactly where myth, philosophy, history, and longing overlap. If we flatten it into pure fiction, we lose why it was convincing. If we treat it as proven history, we go beyond what the sources can bear. The careful path is slower. Plato is our anchor. Later theories are reception history unless evidence gives them more weight, and the island itself, whether imagined, adapted, or built from older motifs of disaster and power, became one of the most durable symbols in the ancient imagination. To understand Atlantis, it helps to notice what Plato chooses to emphasize. He is not writing a travel guide. He is not inviting a fleet to sail west and measure the sea. He is building a story world in which a city can be judged. Atlantis begins in divine order. Poseidon marks out the island. The first kings are given laws. The rulers gather at intervals, sacrifice, deliberate, and remember the commands that bind them. In the beginning, they are said to possess a kind of greatness that is not only material. Their wealth is enormous, but they do not yet behave as if wealth is the highest good. Then the human element grows stronger. The divine portion weakens. Desire, pride, and ambition take hold. The rulers become less able to bear prosperity. Their power remains, but their judgment declines. That movement is deeply Platonic. The danger is not simply that a wave comes. The danger is that a civilization can become impressive on the outside while losing the order that once gave it meaning. This is why Atlantis is paired with ancient Athens. The island empire is not only a marvel, it is the opposite number of the ideal city. Athens, in the story, resists imperial expansion. It stands almost alone. Then, after the conflict, disaster comes. Earthquakes and floods strike. Atlantis disappears beneath the sea. The old Athens is also damaged and forgotten. Memory itself becomes part of the tragedy. Great events do not survive simply because they happened. They survive only if people preserve them, retell them, copy them, and believe they matter. Plato's Egyptian priests say that many Greek memories were lost because catastrophe repeatedly erased records and survivors had to begin again. Whether or not one reads that as literal history, it is an unforgettable idea. Civilization is fragile not only in stone, but in memory. Later readers were drawn to the geography. Atlantis is placed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a phrase usually associated with the entrance to the Atlantic beyond the Mediterranean. Plato says the island was large and powerful. He gives it canals, harbors, walls, temples, and a central plain. These are exactly the kinds of details that make the imagination ask, where was it? Over centuries, answers multiplied. Some looked westward into the Atlantic. Some connected Atlantis with islands. Others compared it with memories of volcanic destruction. In modern discussions, Thera and Bronze Age Crete often appear because the eruption of Thera and the world of Minoan Crete offer real archaeology, real disaster, and real sea power in the Bronze Age Eastern Mediterranean. Those comparisons can be useful, but they require restraint. Thera and Crete can help us understand why a story of island power, sea networks, palace culture, and catastrophe feels plausible to modern readers. They do not, by themselves, prove that Plato was describing a specific lost island called Atlantis. The direction of the evidence matters. We have Plato's text, we have Bronze Age archaeology. Connecting them is interpretation, not a solved equation. The same caution applies to every proposed location. A candidate site may be interesting, it may illuminate ancient landscapes or modern desires, but if the argument quietly turns from could remind us of Atlantis into therefore Atlantis was here, the story has outrun the evidence. Atlantis became famous partly because it is so easy to move. It can be placed in many seas, tied to many ruins, and recruited into many dreams. That flexibility is not a weakness of the myth, it is one of its powers. The island can be a warning against empire, it can be a memory of disaster, it can be a philosophical mirror, it can be a fantasy of lost knowledge, it can be a test of how badly we want the past to contain a secret waiting for us. And because Plato's Critias breaks off unfinished, the story never fully closes. We are left with a detailed beginning, a powerful moral arc, and an ending that history, speculation, and imagination have been trying to complete ever since. The modern Atlantis is not only Plato's Atlantis, it is Plato's story after more than 2,000 years of retelling. In antiquity and later literature, Atlantis could be read as a moral example, a political allegory, or a strange report from deep time. In the modern world, it became something larger and less controlled, a lost super-civilization, an origin point, a hidden technology, a symbol of catastrophe, sometimes even a doorway into pseudo-archaeology. One major step in that transformation was the 19th century appetite for grand lost world theories. Writers such as Ignatius Donnelly helped popularize the idea that Atlantis had been a real prehistoric civilization behind many later cultures. That kind of argument was influential in the history of popular imagination, but it is not the same thing as evidence from the ancient world. The difference matters because Atlantis often attracts a particular kind of certainty. People want the story to be solved. They want the island to be found, identified, mapped, and closed. But the oldest source does not give us that kind of closure. It gives us a dialogue. It gives us a story about an ideal Athens and a corrupted empire. It gives us an account mediated through memory. It gives us impressive details, but not an excavation. It gives us catastrophe, but not a layer in the seabed that says Atlantis in Greek letters. It gives us the feeling of ancient history while constantly asking what kind of history human beings choose to preserve. That may be why Atlantis remains so difficult to let go of. If it were only a fictional island, it might have stayed inside a footnote to Plato. If it were a securely identified archaeological site, it would belong to museums, field reports, and textbooks. Instead, it remains suspended. It is near enough to history to invite investigation, but far enough from proof to invite myth. For a mythic history series, that suspended state is not a problem. It is the subject. Atlantis shows how a story can become more real in culture than in evidence. It shows how ancient literature can generate modern searches. It shows how catastrophe, pride, and memory can turn into geography. It shows how easily the desire for wonder can become the desire for certainty. So perhaps the most honest ending is not Atlantis was here, nor is it simply Atlantis was nothing. The more careful ending is this: Atlantis is Plato's island first. It is a literary and philosophical construction preserved in the Timaeus and the unfinished Critias. Around that island, later generations built rings of interpretation, speculation, warning, fantasy, and hope. Some of those rings are scholarly, some are poetic, some are misleading. All of them show the same human impulse to look at the broken shoreline of the past and imagine that somewhere beneath the water there is a complete answer. But the power of Atlantis may come from the fact that the answer never fully rises. The island sinks, the text breaks off, the archive is indirect, the sea remains quiet, and in that silence Plato's story continues to do what it has always done. It asks what makes a civilization great. It asks what destroys one. It asks whether memory can survive disaster. And it asks whether we are wise enough to tell the difference between a clue, a symbol, and a dream. That is why Atlantis would not die, not because it has been found, because it is still asking us what we are hoping to find.